There
There
it
it
is. Sarah and Sarah meet again.
Together again.
I'm so excited to be talking to you today and asking you all kinds of large questions.
We're going big.
We are. We're going big. We're going deep. I want to go in. I want to go really far in because out and in, because the things I want to talk about are what it means to be a human. And the key word with our conversation is be, because you do this cool work around the way of being that I find fascinating and still, like years later, kind of confusing. And so I would love to break it down. And you're a wildly creative person who can also break down the creative process for people. And I think that's really important. And we also share our training in embodied yoga principles, where I first met you in Austin, Texas, 2019?
2018. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, great. Yeah. So first I'll just start with questions. We'll get into like your background and everything, I think, as we go.
Let's do it. Okay, sounds good.
Well, actually, we'll first start with, now you're in Arizona, which is the tea mug I'm drinking with today. So hi from Arizona, or hi Arizona from Missouri. I'll say I live in Washington State now, but I'm back home in my childhood room. So it's so funny that I'm like starting this project back home in the room that I lived in from 6 years old to 19 years old. Now my parents now use it as storage. So like there's this thread that we're working with here around home and humans and being creative. That will just start at the beginning. Okay, I'll stop rambling.
I love it.
Sarah Martin, the ontological coach. What is ontological coaching? Why study it? And how do you coach someone like with that? What is that?
Yeah, good questions. So ontological coaching is a really big word that really is just concerned with how we are being in the world, right? How are we observing the world? How are we in the world? Ontological coaching was really attractive to me because it's such a unique, personal, reflective way of really getting to know your perspective, right? Really the way that we observe the world colors everything we do. It determines our actions, right? Your observer is made up of your body and your emotion and your language. So the things that we say reveal how we observe the world. The way that we are in our embodied selves, the way we carry ourselves and walk through space, and the way our posture shifts when we meet somebody. That reveals something about the way that we observe the world. And our emotions, of course, right? The way that we respond or react to the world, all of these pieces, they like dance. They're like always in a dynamic dance of coherence. And these three aspects of how we see the world can tell us a lot about what might be getting in the way or what might be driving us at any given moment. And so for me, ontological coaching and coaching in particular came at a time when I was really diving into embodiment, and I was falling in love with a way of understanding myself and the world that I guess I kind of always knew it was there, and it was important, but I didn't have language for it. And when I realized, like, oh, there's actually a lot more sense making to be done about how our embodied selves and and our life experiences contribute to who we are and how we are. That's when I really found the ontological lens and decided to dive in and dedicate study and practice to it. Yeah, so that's kind of like a big overview of ontological coaching and what it is. You asked maybe 2 or 3 questions all at once. Where should I go?
Yeah. Well, you answered it. I asked why study it? What is it? Why study it? And how do you coach someone with that?
Yeah.
Because you said body, emotions, and language.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
those are like the 3 domains that you work with people through.
Yeah.
Whatever the coaching query is that they're working with.
Yeah. And a lot of, being an ontological coach is really, there's so much reflection, it's all about questions. What kinds of questions can we ask about a particular way that, a client or somebody is showing up to a coaching conversation? When somebody comes to me with a particular challenge, I work a lot with people who are recognizing that the status quo that they've been existing in just sometimes suddenly isn't okay anymore. And then maybe they feel a little bit lost, or they don't know where to begin to kind of tease out. So if this is not okay, what does this mean? Like, I know I don't want this, but the world, like the field is too wide open for me to even know where to begin. And so, a lot of what we do in a coaching session seeks to kind of like shine a light on, well, what do you think about not knowing where to go? Or tell me about where you feel that in your body. Like, I noticed that you kind of like do something like this when you think about not knowing what to do, whatever. But like, my role as a coach is about asking questions. It's about observing how somebody shows up to a conversation, and often just reflecting things, because the reality is, we live our lives and it works for us until it doesn't, right? Aspects of our life are fine and they can go on indefinitely. And then other pieces, it's like, whoa, suddenly that's like, what? That's not okay. But, oftentimes we get into these ways of being that we're so practiced at. It's such a routine. It's so normal for us that it becomes transparent to us. And so it's like looking through a window where you don't know you're looking through a lens. And ontological coaching helps us recognize like what has become transparent to us so that we can be more choiceful. Because once you have awareness around something and you can say, oh, wow, I didn't know I was looking through that lens, or have that veil or that particular filter over the way that I was looking at a particular situation. Once you know the filter is there, you can be choiceful about whether or not you want to keep that filter, or maybe the color of the filter needs to change. Maybe you need to get rid of the filter altogether, but you get to choose. And that's at the heart of what ontological coaching is. And of course, from our shared training, that's also what embodiment is all about: awareness and choice, right? So that we're not blindly and transparently and unconsciously moving through our lives, but when we meet something that is maybe uncomfortable, or it doesn't even have to be uncomfortable, it can be amazing, right? But we have awareness of the language of our body, the very unique language of our own embodiment, so that we can be choiceful with what to do with that.
You're so cool. I love your and you a big purpose for me wanting to do interviews and ask questions of people who I think, in my eyes have found it, or like have like you're interested or doing work that I find so valuable and interesting along the lines of like, what does it mean to be human and accept I mean, I love like the name we were talking before, the name of your business, Homebody, and different places. It's even funny that I'm back in my childhood home. There it is.
Oh, my.
It's finding ways of being at home with myself despite where I'm at in the world or what the circumstances are, or threading old ways of being in with new ways of being. And especially since COVID, so many people, myself included, I mean, the whole organized world of what I thought there was just wiped. I mean, like very, very quickly. And how to help people recognize that sense of home, and it sounds like the core of the work that you're doing, and then with my experience with ontological coaching with you, helped me see that I have all those tools, all those lenses are within me, and I can like rebuild home at any time. And that's like horrifying. But it's really cool. It's really cool work. It was actually when you first began with ontological coaching, and I was like, I want to experience this, and you worked with me through, and it was actually that work with you that helped me understand an archetype within myself, which was the soldier. And I was curious at the time where my fighting came from, and acknowledging that archetype is so strong in my life, and that I too have the drive of the universal soldier. Do you know that song? And
I don't know the song. Which song are you talking about?
Buffy singing Universal Soldier. It's fascinating. But yeah, your work with like, oh, that is a piece of me, but it's not my whole me. Yeah. And my next question is, yeah, with embodied yoga principles, that training, acknowledging you're not free unless you actually have the tools to change. So my next question is, what's the difference between our state and our way of being? Because isn't that what ontological means, our way of being?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would have to actually do a Google search to recall the literal definition. That probably makes me not a great acolyte for ontological coaching. But yeah, it is about being, right? And your question is a really good one. I was thinking about this earlier today. States, I feel like states can come and go, but there's like a fundamental, or I think of it as the essential self, right? So there's like a core self, and that core self has preferences and ways that it sort of like naturally wants to be and exist and flow and do all these things, right? But states, so I think of being as sort of a quality or a way that, yes, it can shift. Our ways of being can shift, but as a being, this is going to get very heady. I can already tell. Like human being, I am a being, I am an entity, I am a sovereign self, regardless of whether I'm in a state of shock, whether I'm in a state of grace, whether I'm in a state of flow. And when I say states can come and go, we can also get stuck, right? I can be stuck in a state of shock. I can be stuck in a pattern or a state of flow where I can't get anything done because I just keep flowing and flow, Mm-hmm. States sort of reflect something about how we're being. But I think fundamentally that the beautiful thing is that we have the ability to shift And, once we recognize how we are being in a moment, we can recognize if our state is helping us, hindering us, supporting us. How are our states and our traits contributing to how we are being? And then we get to make a choice. And sometimes that's a momentary choice where it's like, oh, this is not serving me right now. I'm going to do something immediately, and I'm going to shift what's happening in this moment. But, with bigger traits and patterns that we get into, oftentimes it takes practice and it takes a kind of cultivation over time to shift something that's more deeply embedded into our way of being that we would like to shift and not incorporate so fully into our existence. And I want to be really careful as I say all this, because none of the states or traits, it's not about having good traits and states or bad states and traits or any of that stuff. It's just about acknowledging what is. And when we have the courage to be able to really truthfully and honestly, as individuals, as human beings being human, being able to say like, oh, wow, this is a thing I'm doing, or this is a way that I'm being that isn't how I'd like to continue being, right? It takes a lot of courage to do that. And then also to take action again and again over time to shift what needs shifting. Kind of brought traits in there. I don't know if that confuses or helps, but I felt like I couldn't talk about one without the other.
Yeah, I think it helps. What's coming up for me is the word environment, and how like the environment I put myself in can affect my state, but over time it can affect my trait. And it's part of that like reflection that my environment can reflect back to me. It can help me understand. I mentioned like moving across the country. It's like I was able to see different parts of myself and traits in new ways. And not that moving is even like the thing that has to happen to see that, but even just the immediate environment has that potential for feedback wherever the people are. And that's why we do cool workshops and like meet new people who provide new lenses. And I think to reflect back to me what is a pattern versus what's just happening right now.
Being able
to track over time those traits and differentiate them from my state and but both are so useful. And
totally.
I think we'll get into that with embodied yoga principles.
And just real quick, Sarah, the other, as you were talking about environment, you're bringing up one of the most important pieces of this, which is really about context, right?
Yeah.
And I'm appreciating the immediate moment versus a longer trajectory of forming a trait, like something that feels like it's intrinsically part of you, for better or for worse, right? In ontological coaching, we talk a lot about how emotions are something we experience in real time. And, sometimes we can get into a kind of rut with a lot of the emotions that we experience, such that it becomes a mood. And moods, when you are in a mood, it's something that's more embedded. It's sort of a baseline, right? So there are these ways that we're embodied that are the same thing, that, like you can have a present tense experience. But for example, I do a lot of work around stress. And if you are experiencing chronic stress over a long period of time, an example of, entering into like it becoming a trait is that you just have a baseline of hypervigilance, for example. Not necessarily, if chronic stress is your baseline, then it becomes the lens through which you look at the entire world. And, you know, I don't remember who said it, but like, if you're looking for X, you're likely going to find it, right? Like, if you're looking for the world to be a dangerous place or a horrible place, or you're looking even to prevent stress, then you're focused on stress, you know, and that's gonna like color everything about it. So this idea of environment, geography being part of it, family context, that you're having this conversation in your childhood bedroom, and I'm having a conversation in a house that I've only existed in for 10 days, 13 days.
In a new state.
In a new state, right? All of this is affecting and coming together. It's like the unique alchemy of this particular moment for this particular conversation we're having. And that can be amazing and beautiful. And it can also be tricky, right? Because it can hold a lot of stuff that maybe we're not aware of, or we're not thinking about, and we're not considering as we sit down to connect in this way. I mean, I think it's going fine. Don't get me wrong.
I mean, just hearing in a new state, like, you know, that has I'm just hearing myself say like, oh, what I meant was from Texas to Arizona, but also like the state of your being, like all those layers, that's all there.
Yeah. And we're never separate from that. That's the thing. It's like our contexts are always there. The environment, the people we're with, the social environment, the cultural context, our family story, like it's always there with us, for better or for worse. Yeah. And doesn't mean that we have to be constantly like analyzing and sort of looking out for, but having awareness about ourselves in this sort of this way of deeply knowing ourselves. In my experience, and I think in a lot of my clients' experience, it's a pathway to finding ease in the world and being able to connect to a sense of your own sovereign power. And I don't mean power over, but like power within, like agency. And yeah, I just feel like we're so much more powerful than we know. And ontological coaching, embodiment is they're just such wonderful practices and experiences to kind of connect to that power and agency.
Do you hold any particular philosophy? This is such a vague and dumb question, but
I'm here
like about around being human. Like, do you believe that people are inherently good, or like, do you believe that we understand metaphor more than language? Like, if that tugs on any threads, or like, are there laws of nature around us?
You know, you asked this question, and I have no specific wisdom to share. Like nothing. There's no quote that I can pull from.
You don't got a Rumi quote in your pocket. You can just whip out in a sentence.
Yeah. There are, I mean, don't get me wrong. Once I unpack my office and get it set up, the wall in front of me will be littered with little Post-its and note cards of quotes and things like this, because I'm a big fan of those big reminders, right? To kind of keep it all right-sized, the stakes of life and living and what are we here for? But I appreciate your question a lot. I don't think it's a dumb question at all. Given that it's a totally spontaneous question and I haven't thought about it, I mean, all of this is, but there was a time where I genuinely thought like, oh, the world, everybody's inherently good. And I don't know that, I can't say that I believe that to be true or not true. I want to believe in the possibility, like the potential for goodness and connection in the world. And I think that is the driving force for most things that I do. I think deeply, inherently, I am here on this planet at this particular time in the history of the world. This little blip time, itsy bitsy piece of time on the radar. I'm here to create connection. For me, that's really, it requires a belief that we all have the capacity for connection, and the acknowledgement on some sort of like innocent, unknowing way that the need for connection is one of the most important things, necessary things for anything in the world. Like for me, being able to create connection, be connected to you, technology notwithstanding, but feeling connected to somebody is the kind of experience that has the potential to heal the world, right? When we are out of connection with ourselves, it is very difficult to genuinely connect with others. We can connect, we can certainly connect when we're not connected to ourselves. I'm not saying that that's impossible, but the kind of connection that we can experience and what results from being connected to ourselves and being able to connect to others is, to me, the foundation for generating all of the good things that are possible in the world. That feels like a really hyperbolic statement, but I don't mean it hyperbolically. I guess I mean it in the like most naive, beautiful, soulful, maybe naive is not giving it enough credit, but like it's a genuinely, it's a heartfelt, feels like a mission for me, you know.
Yeah.
It feels very true. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I can relate to that. Because I mean, I'm a big student of Paul Linden, and
Yeah.
he has this way of explaining. I mean, I think during the embodiment conference, he even had like a whole talk on why it's so human to dehumanize. And to me, that it is that disconnection. Like if you are, I mean, he had a student who I love this story because he had a client who came to him and told him, like, I feel the most alive when I'm beating somebody up. Like that's when he felt the most connected within himself, and the way he could actually connect to another person that's when he could feel all of that.
Wow.
And Paul was a big teacher for me, and like what you connect with and what brings you alive can set the baseline for the connection that you seek. And being able, and this is why I studied nature connection, because I believe we are all nature, and it's reaching out and grabbing those little threads of ourselves and each other, and finding a connection to our joy, and why that might be more useful than finding connection to our anger, and like human emotion as a lens that you're helping people work through, and language around that too, of course. It's been so useful to me, even just to like create a good and bad of human emotion, because it helps me track like, oh, I'm stuck in, because the chronic stress or sadness, melancholy. For me, it was sadness. I became so depressed because that was the way I could connect to my emotions. It felt rich to me to grieve the sadness of the world. And so that just became the way I could truly express myself, was through that. And it's like, actually, excitement is a whole nother realm. And like, there's so much more I can connect with, like in nature connection, like birds, my awareness of birds has totally shifted the way I can connect with my environment. And yeah, so I love that. That's a great answer to my dumb question. Because
not a dumb question. It's a big question. You said we were going big.
Right.
And we just did it.
Yeah, I because I didn't know what I was going for, but the fact that you were like, yeah, that's a mission for me, and here's what I mean, and it's like, yeah, hell yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Well, and I really appreciate what you bring up about nature. When you first asked the question, the first thing I thought of was related to nature. You know, when I was younger, I was so connected, like the animus of the world. Everything had animus. The pillow and blanket that I slept on, the rock, like it could be inanimate objects, animate objects, natural things, synthetics, but like, and you know, of course, my parents were like, "Oh, she's just wildly creative," and to me, I was just like, "No, I'm just connected to all the things." I felt like I could talk to animals. I mean, yeah, there's some creativity, but also like the alchemy of childhood, right? And sort of how open we can be to the world. And at that age, you know, as I became a teenager, I really fell in love with the transcendentalists. When I started to fall in love with language and Shakespeare and stories, oh my gosh, I just loved the transcendentalists and, you know, Thoreau, how he wrote about being in the woods and the solitude and just finding God in everything. And I remember my my first high school English teacher gave me this. I still have it. Ron Roselle, I still have your file on transcendentalism. Thank you very much, because it still speaks to me. I don't know if you wanted it back, but if you do, you know where to find me. I had never heard of transcendentalists, and I just devoured it. And it was just so refreshing to sort of have, you know, these 18th and 19th century poet writers give voice to the very like romantic, beautiful, connected things that I was experiencing and I didn't have language for at the time, you know. God, nature is such an opener, such a way for us to talk about right-sizing our context, but like feeling our connection as a living thing among the living and natural world. That is no joke. That is
No
some
joke.
stuff. Yeah.
It's the big body.
Yes.
We're the little body. It's the big body. I love that.
Yeah.
Because it's like, it's to me just that little, it's the big body. It's oh, I don't want to go too far into it, but it's like, that's the connection that's always there. That's the thing that's always holding me. And yeah, I love, you know, looking up at the moon and thinking all my friends are under this same moon right now. It's, yeah, I never, since really connecting, allowing myself to connect with more and more aspects of nature that I did takes like learning about in a lot of cases, like the birds, like I mentioned, like I didn't know that robins know so much, and you know, to get to know the robins everywhere on the world, like, yeah, this kind of bleeds into my next topic, which is creativity. Because you mentioned there was so much creativity. Some of it was creativity from your childhood. And when I first met you, I was awestruck at your like logical, creative, critical isn't the right word, but like you have this really beautiful way of articulating things. And then to learn that you're a theater nerd and like not to call you a theater, I'm a theater nerd too, but like you're this like rich creative thespian with like this artistic ability, and I feel like there's something about this type A, type B people that you know, I love meeting people who just like blur those lines for me, because and so can you do you think everyone is creative, or, and this is a separate question maybe, but like what drew you to, is it seeing that everyone has that creative potential that drew you to studying creativity? Because what you helped me with at the end of our workshop together was you drew out the creative process, and I had it taped on my wall for years. I still have it. It's just a little piece of paper with a giant scribble, and you wrote out the steps of the creative process. And every time I would get stuck in any aspect of my life, I would go and I'd be like, oh, I'm just incubating on this. And then like,
Yeah.
you have a way, what is it about being able to like articulate madness that
well, that's it, right? Like,
okay.
I love that you had that on your wall for a while, and it like continued to help and help you land where you were in a larger process. Because that is exactly why I think creativity is so powerful, because it's what'd you say, articulating madness?
Something, yeah.
Because creativity can all feel very chaotic.
Yeah.
Right? To have ideas or to be in a process that you don't know what the heck is going on, and maybe it's not a pleasant process, but just when you know that there's an arc to the thing that you're doing, right? There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And just as with like during our embodiment training, right? We learn about seasons, we learn about, spring, summer, fall, and winter. And each of these seasons has it denotes a different kind of engagement, right? The creative process is a version of that. It's exactly the same thing. And not exactly, right? I mean, it has different lenses, but when I learned that, I think one of the most powerful things for me was when I learned that when I was learning how to draw, when I was learning how to be an artist, and as you mentioned, like I'm a theater nerd. I have a 20-year career in theater. So
do you find that term endearing, by the way?
A theater nerd?
Yeah.
Oh, hell yeah, of course. I
Some
mean,
people don't like that word, so
oh no, I'm definitely, I love it because and actually I just had a conversation with somebody at my husband's just joined the faculty at a university here, and I was chatting with somebody, meeting people for the first time and getting to talk about creativity. And they're all creative, they're all theater people as well, but like getting to totally geek out on talking about the power of a creative process and like what it makes possible when you're learning how to be human. I mean, that is the thing. For me, that's the whole thing.
What it makes possible when you're learning how to be human.
Yeah. That's the whole reason that creativity is fundamental.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was a super creative kid. I was quirky, I was kooky. I never felt like I fit in anywhere. Like regular stuff about the world didn't necessarily make sense to me. Like, I mean, basic things like, why do I have to smile to take a picture? Why are you telling me to smile? I don't want to smile. I'm not in a smiling place. I hated it all felt really weird. And, people just understood like how to be sociable and hi, I'm Sarah. And no, it didn't. I was like painfully shy. I loved my little interior world, played with Legos. I built little houses and stuff. And then I told stories about the people that lived in them.
Mm-hmm.
I was a gymnast as a kid, and I didn't know this at the time. I actually didn't know this until 2018, but being a competitive gymnast from the ages of, I guess, 5 to 12 was a beautiful, like creative embodied period of incubation for me because it's a singular sport. So, I mean, yes, I was part of a team, but you are on your own up there and you have to contend with your nerves and your balance and your execution and sort of you have to own your results. And I didn't understand, like, as fundamental training, that was a pretty influential part of how I grew up. And, I played piano, I sang, I did all of these like typically creative things. But the difference for me was for a lot of my friends and I think even people in my family, creativity was never a viable life choice. like a creative field was not. So I wanted to go into music. At the time, I thought I wanted to be an opera singer. I think I was doing that mostly because a very dear friend of mine at the time was going into opera. We sang together and all this. But my parents were like, we're not going to pay for college. We're not going to do music in college. And I had been to this aptitude testing center. They took me to, I wanted to go because I wanted to know. I was a rule follower. Mm-hmm. And they said at this center that design was one of my greatest aptitudes. I was testing really high naturally. And the theory is, of course, if you're doing things, if you go into a profession that uses your aptitudes, you're more likely to be a happy human and successful. And so they listed out a bunch of professions, and engineering was number one, architecture was number two, music was on the list, but it was like down at number 7, maybe. And so I'm like, see, music is on there. And they're like, oh no, engineering, that makes sense. And I'm like, I'm not going to be an engineer. I don't want anything to do with that. I'm going to go into architecture. And that like silly little childhood rebellion as a 10th grader is how I started learning design. That was the whole impetus. I never would have picked up a paintbrush. I never would have learned how to draw in 3-dimensional perspective. None of that ever would have happened if I had not known something intrinsically that being an engineer was not for me. There was something about what I knew, very limited understanding, but I at least could say, I'll go in this direction, not that one. So I need to abbreviate this. This is getting way too in depth. And the development of it. I guess the thing that's most important to note is I started on this path thinking that going to college, learning architecture, that there was a mastery of skills that I was moving towards that was going to make everything click. And I had checked the box of going into a field that was on the list, and it was design, and that used my aptitudes, checked the box, right? All these things. So I was doing all the right things, following all the rules. But while all of that was happening, life was happening. And as I was growing and being human, there were things about the world, like my life experience, that were sort of like coming in to collide with the things that I thought were true about the world. And so as I was beginning to dismantle all the stuff I thought I knew about the world, just like as a human being, things like, I grew up going to the Methodist church, and that was a wonderful experience. And religion held a very specific role in my life. But as I got into college and my life experiences started to happen, I realized unconsciously, subconsciously, that the rules of the world that I thought were in place, based on this very tidy religious framework, they weren't. And well, holy shit, if they're not, then what do I do with that? And so as I began to sort of like question the container that I had that I thought was my life, suddenly this path of going into architecture, I arrived at my junior year and realized I don't want to practice architecture. Like, I love architecture. I still continue to use art and architecture history as a kind of like baseline for reflection and zooming out and zooming in and thinking about being human, but I don't want to practice it. And thankfully, I defected into theater at that point. And suddenly I was back to playing with Legos again. I was creating worlds. I was telling stories through physical space. And it was at that point, through architecture and then the transition into theater, that I really started to understand the design process as an umbrella. It's the creative process. I use those interchangeably. But I also began to relate it to the scientific method. My father, scientist, right? And he's a PhD chemist. He calls himself an inventor, right? So he basically invents molecules, or he's retired now, but worked for Dow Chemical, and pretty much that's what he did his whole life. And years later, I got to have a conversation with him about like how the scientific method is really the creative process. And he's like, well, yeah, of course. And I'm like, I never knew that. You knew that all this time.
Wow.
But, it's a framework that that can support you and help you understand how to move through a question. Because remember, scientific method starts with a hypothesis. Here's the thing I think is going to happen. And the same thing with theater. Here's the thing we're here to do. I want to create a world, like a set design. I want to create a world that evokes this, this, and this. And then you go through a process of developing ideas, and you get to the point where you're frustrated as hell. And how wonderful to know that frustration is a documented scientific piece of the creative process. Frustration is built in. When you arrive at frustration, congratulations, you're right at the cusp of things starting to make sense. And what a relief when you have that context to be able to say, oh, my frustration, I don't need to bang my head against the wall. Actually, what I probably need to do is go incubate. So go do the dishes, take a walk, whatever, but let it rest. Stop pursuing it, walk away from it so that your subconscious can do the work. And then when you come back to it, maybe you have an aha moment. Maybe you have a noodling feeling that like, oh, something's starting to coalesce. I better go get my pencil and just give myself permission to kind of play around, whatever. But at some point, you make a choice to take the best ideas you have in the moment, to synthesize the thing that suddenly you're going aha about, whatever form it shows up. But that's the thing you move towards completion. And when you have that framework, you get to completion. Maybe that's an opening night. Maybe that's a workshop, right? So you're creating a workshop. The creative process is built in. Opening night is the presentation of the workshop. And then the last piece of it is to do an evaluation. How did the process go for you? And the evaluation part's really important, because if you don't take a look back at how it went, and again, take ownership, just be really honest. Doesn't have to be treacherous. It's just an opportunity to say, oh, I did that really well. Or that conversation, that engagement with my collaborators was really great. I didn't really follow through well on this. I'd like to do that differently. Making it concrete on the back end is what the continuous cycle of growth, that's what enables that to continue. So for me, the creative process is a template for doing anything as a human being. This move is a great example of that. I knew that I was looking at a huge chaotic process. It was going to be lengthy. And so I didn't sit down and map it out as I would create some of my other creative processes. But I was able to say along the way to myself, like, oh, yeah, here's where nothing feels concrete. It's because I'm sort of like inundating myself with information. Like I'm gathering information, I'm doing research, I'm sort of soaking it all up. I'm a sponge right now. And at some point, I'm going to get saturated. There's no more that I can hold, and I need to walk away. Cool. So it helped the process be much less fraught. I could meet my frustration or my stress and acknowledge it for the temporary thing that it was, and keep the process moving forward, even if I wasn't clear or sure or it wasn't comfortable. I could meet all of the myriad emotions and ways that I was feeling, the fear, whatever, and not let it derail the process that was unfolding,
Yeah.
So creativity for me is, it's like a life laboratory. I mean, theater in particular, this work that I was doing before I used to teach at university, and I got into this work called devising. And that blurred lines thing where my role might have been as a designer, but I got to roll around on the floor like an actor and write text and play music and just take all these different parts of who I am and play, right? You get to play and experiment. You have to deal with what it means to take a risk, make a choice out loud in real time, and sit with it. And the idea may suck. And how do you deal with that? You're in a room full of people that we're all committed to getting to the best ideas. So your sucky idea might just sit there like a fart in church, and there's nothing you can do about it. And you got to be okay with it. And like, you figure out how to manage it. And you trust that my terrible idea is going to spark something in someone else. That's going to be a better idea that's going to lead to the final idea that we end up putting in the show. And so there's this beautiful individual experience of creativity that is teaching us, taught me how to, that I was capable of handling my own discomfort, that I didn't need the approval of other people or the rules, the people that write the rules. I didn't need their approval to determine whether or not an idea is good or bad or acceptable or not acceptable. But then there's also this bigger collaborative creative process that's unfolding, and you have to contend with identities and personalities, and how do we each show up when we're nervous and scared, and we're all committed to this thing that we believe is a story worth telling. And when it gets really hard, how do you as an individual stay committed, and how do you collectively come together to make that happen, to keep moving forward? So I'm sorry, I've been rambling for a really long time.
No, that's okay. My dogs are fighting outside, and can you hear them?
No.
Can you hear them? Really? Oh, okay, good.
I've been rambling, so
they're sparring. No, you have me thinking on all these levels now, because, well, first, it's very countercultural to stop a process before you've achieved it. And so to realize that walking away could be a part of the achieving is really relieving. Both for the scientific process and the creative process. And I love that, in a way, I love that you called the creative process also a design process, and that tied that to the scientific process of like having hypothesis and kind of reverse engineering the thing you're trying to see if it's real in the world. I can see how all of that turned you into an ontological coach in the end.
Yeah.
Well, in the end, right now, and
because the arc is still going, right?
Yeah, we're still in it. But my question was, and it kind of you've already answered, but like the difference between a thespian and a non-thespian. Now it's like the difference between a scientist and a non-scientist, or a designer and a non-designer. It's the movement. That's what I'm hearing. Like, even if walking away is the movement, you can't stay stuck in that stasis. And so like even homeostasis is never stillness. Even though our body is seeking a homeostasis, and that's something in the middle of balance, we're not actually finding it. We're not actually coming to a state of equilibrium. When we stop moving, we die. And so to walk away from that stasis in the process allows the movement of the process to keep happening. That's what I'm hearing.
Yes, absolutely. I love that association. And this word stasis has a very special meaning in theater as well, like storytelling in particular, because when you have a play, and at the beginning of a play, there is a stasis that exists. So there's a world that If something doesn't happen, which is the inciting incidents, it's the thing that happens that makes the story of a play begin to unfold. The stasis that exists at the beginning of a play, if not for this inciting experience or incident, it would continue, right? It would just continue. So this status quo, this stasis just continues unless there is this moment, right? And it's true of us as humans, right? We continue in our status quo until there's something that disrupts it. That's something that enlivens a process, perhaps. And it doesn't have to be an incident, right? That's such a like frightening word, maybe, but
a coach, you know, having a coach, a mirror, anything
absolutely.
to help you work through any. I mean, because you use that status quo with clients is like what people are reckoning with in their moments of changing the way they're being. Most people I think come to coaching or help or support or leadership or anything because they want the change is desired on some level. And what's has been working is the status quo, and what they're seeking is to break from that. And so I'm hearing that's part of the creative process, or like the design of life, like the design of the way I'm being in the world, that like, oh, I've reached a point that I can no longer go forward and maintain my trajectory. It's not like we're always onward and upward, but maybe in that stasis, that incubation period too is so important. Like the years or months or years that I've just spent just hiding under a rock is just as important to my growth as the sprout years.
Absolutely. And, it's so funny. We were talking before you started recording, where I'm just sort of connecting this to the creative process, but I was sharing that, the last 5 years, 3 years, 2 years, I'm starting to recognize how much incubation has been going on during that time. Yes, there were periods of like doing and trajectory, as you say, right? But like, there was also a lot of like noodling and being in it and it being really intense and walking away, and in it and churning about it and trying to make sense of it and then walking away. And so it's such a beautiful thing that you're pointing to, and I'm really appreciating it, because the creative process is not linear. And I think this is one of the things that is so beautiful to me about it. Even the design design, creativity, scientific method. When I first learned scientific method, of course, I'm like, oh, thank goodness, it's logical, it's linear, it's in a straight line, perfect, right? But
I can do this, no problem.
Right? Now I'm in this step and then this, and I know exactly what's coming next. And there's some comfort in that, right? But the creative process, have you ever seen like, there's all these memes and graphics that say what we think the process will be, and it's a straight line. And then what the process really is, and it's like this circuitous sort of like going
backwards off the page, comes back over here.
Exactly. And that's the reality of what it can feel like, but it doesn't have to feel onerous or terrifying when we understand that that's just part of how it works. And we are cultivating.
You paused. You're frozen. Are you there? I'm gonna pause
we're gonna be okay.
Okay, you froze. All I heard was we're gonna.
Dang it.
But I think that maybe wherever you picked off, that somehow sums it up for me, because I'm like, we're gonna be okay, because that process is still leading us.
To
the thing.
Yeah. If you are cultivating trust, knowing, and connection with yourself, you belong to yourself, you're at home with yourself, then what is happening in that process, no matter where you are on that very circuitous trajectory, on some level, it's going to be okay. Even if it's uncomfortable right now, even if it kind of sucks, even if it's really terrible, going to be okay. I can trust.
Yeah, as like I can lean into the chaos that I'm allowing into my life because
Yeah.
of that linear time isn't really linear, but I something that I kind of used in my as an example in my nutrition classes is like we all age one day every day. Like time may be nonlinear, the way we experience it, our perception is all perceptual, but
Yeah.
um today is 24 hours and tomorrow will be 2. So like if I can lean into like I will allow the chaos and the creativity to work me and trust that this process will continue to unfold and that I will be okay in the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's very
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's such a great distinction, right? Like there
one day
is,
at a time, one day at a time.
yeah, right. And it's such a call for presence too, like this present moment.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, speaking of presence, um, to embodied yoga principles, being a state, like an awareness of our state and where we are with the present. You said earlier, like it's being with what is, and or the embodiment, like to embody, to be. Oh, I had a question actually about earlier before we move on.
Yeah.
That moment where you said you changed from like architecture to design. It sounded like it was in college when you made that switch and you started to study things differently. How old were you when you made that switch?
I was I was 19, 20
Okay.
because I was studying abroad in Charleston, South Carolina. So I went to school at Clemson, which is about, I think, 4 hours from Charleston. But I was studying architecture in a historic context. And so they had a satellite campus in Charleston. And it was, as I said, like as I was becoming dismantled, like all the things of the world that I thought I knew were kind of crashing down around me. I had a terrible semester. Oh my gosh, I got a C in design studio, which for this straight A kid was devastating. But I was like angry and I was like raging against oh gosh, Matthew Rice, wherever you are, Dr. Rice, thank you for putting up with me that semester because I was not an easy student. Now that I've been a professor, I understand how difficult it can be when your students are like growing and changing and becoming who they are, and to want to assist, to want to like be there on the journey, but Matthew Rice, you did everything right. You were consistent. You did not engage in my chaos, and you let me do what I needed to do. And that was essentially at the end of the semester, I wrote this epic letter to probably to Dr. Rice and maybe the folks back at Clemson, that I was running away to do theater for the summer. I was changing my path, and I went and did summer stock theater at the Barn Theater in Augusta, Michigan. And I did it. I became a theater techie, and that was, the rest was history. My senior year, I spent doing theater design. So yeah, 1920. Why do you ask? Is that a pivotal time for you too?
I was leaving the church at around that time, and so my world was also collapsing around me, like with oh well, these rules that I've lived my whole life by
no
longer apply. And there was the few years after that, and then the decade that followed, and now the new chapter that I'm in at 30. It's like, okay, this is, looking back is so rich. And that's why I ask also, because if people are watching and that if at that age, like allow yourself the opportunity to let the walls fall, and
yes,
and allow yourself the freedom to build new ones, and then trust that you can. And
if you don't, I'm sorry, I interrupted. Go ahead.
no, at any age is all I.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I guess I didn't understand that I wasn't alone when that was happening. I mean, this felt like, and maybe that's like developmentally, that's just where I was or where most 19 and 20-year-olds are, but you don't have to do it alone. Like I think that's one of the beautiful things about the generation that is coming up right now. I hope, it's aspirational. I don't have any data to back it up, but it's so much more acceptable to have resources and reach out to resources. And I think colleges and universities are upping their game about support and services and programs that sort of like help students during that time of life to really begin to try and make sense of the world for themselves. Because it makes sense to me that that's a time, it's the transition between perhaps, and I'm painting with a very broad brush here, but for a lot of students, it's that transition where you're emerging from the home that was made for you to beginning to make a home for yourself in the world. And in order to do that, you have to contend with yourself. You have to figure out what it is to be at home with yourself. And that is not an easy task. And it's not built into our society to know how to do that. We don't teach. So
that's what I was saying earlier about like it's countercultural to stop before you achieve, because what our society does encourage is to just achieve. And I'm really grateful. I did 2 years of community college right after high school. So like when I was 20, that transition period and the time that I was working through leaving the church and breaking up with my preacher boyfriend at the time, and then that 20 starting at university as opposed to community college, even like, okay, now I'm going to choose a major. And then that's when I went from just the general associates to a bachelor's in dietetics and got really more focused. And it's those markers. My work in Nature Connection comes back to like offering rites of passage at different points in life and at any age, but especially that age, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, like that's a rich time to support people in their process of letting, leaving the home that was built and allowing and giving space so that people can let their true desires come forward and that they give them room to question the achievements that we put on pedestals for the young people,
and acknowledging that like the choices you make about who you are and how you want to be when you're 17, 18, 19, those are the right choices for then. And when you arrive at 27, 28, 29, and those choices, you're still sort of living by those choices and you're like, oh, that's not it anymore. You haven't failed, right? You're just human, right? You lived that until it wasn't the thing to live anymore. And now it's time to go through that process of, as you said, building that home again and again. And maybe it's not like starting from scratch. You don't have to abandon the home that you built, but maybe it's shoring up the foundation, or maybe it's tearing down a wall and opening up a room, or redecorating something, right? Yeah.
And I'll say, as someone who in a very, very short amount of time decided to just abandon the home that I had built, like sometimes that's the medicine, but it's a hard, grueling journey that I don't encourage for people to do willingly. I mean, I think of like refugees who, like, it's in a lot of cases, not a lot, but maybe a lot. It's just that overnight, time to go, time to get, like, we have to leave now, right now. And the trauma that I mean, that's one reason I am passionate about real estate and finding new ways of home for our each other, and because that's, I mean, I think of the book of Exodus being raised, in the church, like that is a leap of faith that is just so, that's another intrinsic human thing that I think is within us, is that like to trust in that better future, and to say this is no longer working, like whatever that is on the micro and macro level, that we've hit on. I feel like that's the thread here.
Yeah. Yep. I agree with you that there's
the slow process is a little more palatable,
palatable, I think, like able to tolerate.
Yeah, like what you said, like tearing down a wall, shoring up the foundation. I think that's the medicine.
Yeah. But I really appreciate what you're saying about sometimes, I definitely have abandoned the house in my time. And it's painful and hard, but, sometimes it feels like the best wisdom at the moment. And, again, it's not wrong. Hindsight's always 2020, to be able to look back at something and say, wow, I really could have done that differently, or I wish I would have. But at the time, if that option felt available to us, we would have done it.
Totally. Oh, wow.
So,
that's a really important. Yeah, because I'm thinking like it's also a beautiful thing to like know in my heart that I'm capable of healing after destroying the house that I built.
Yeah.
Whether it was destroyed or I just shored up the foundation, like humans can do it. We can do it. And something you said about support, like we're not alone, to reach out and have support despite the journey or the path that we choose to leave. Both are rich. I would like to pause it here just really quick. Where's my mouse? All right, little break there, we're back. So getting into embodied yoga principles, and you said you just finished the certificate of embodiment coaching?
Yep. Yeah. Certification of embodiment coaching.
Okay. And I did the foundations of embodiment coaching. I didn't technically complete the coaching certificate part, I don't think, but I'll go back to it. But that was all under the group of people that did put on the embodiment conference, and Mark Walsh. And in embodied yoga principles, that workshop was taught by Mark, and he came to Austin to do the first EYP training in Austin, that I helped put on, because I went to Brighton for that training and before that. And so that's our thread of connection, and we have, I guess, in that community, a lot of shared interests. And we worked the embodiment conference together. And I just want to take a moment to fangirl with you over the fact that you, some like big names were part of the embodiment conference. Gabor Mate, Richard Schwartz, I'm not going to go through them all, but Alanis Morissette.
Yeah, Richard Schwartz and Alanis, that was the call. They were on that together. So,
okay, I know that she was a part of some panels and stuff too. Yeah, but she does a lot of work in internal family systems. So that
she's a big fan, and she's been involved in that work, like participated for her own healing in the parts work. And she has studied it. She and Dr. Schwartz, I think, know each other, and she's a big fan of his work.
So can we fangirl right now and me ask you about what was it like? Because I am talking to the tech host of Alanis's panel, everyone. Sarah Martin was there in the room live with Alanis, and I was there live as a witness. And I was like, that's my friend Sarah. That's Sarah. She's talking to Alanis right now. So what was that like? Because I knew you grew up with her music too. And
oh my gosh. So Alanis Morissette, first of all, that I just she is an incredible human being, and she played a huge role in my late high school, early college experience of like stepping into my own, like entertaining, like just even dipping my toe in the pool of like, oh, I might be a powerful person. Like I have a voice that I could maybe use. And like, but she is, wow, she is just such a powerful force of nature. She was back then for me. Then she did that album. I think she took a trip to India. And that album that came out after that was just such a touchstone for me. There was like so much stuff happening in my life. So like, oh, thank you, Alanis, for for helping me make sense of all of the stuff that was happening. And to be in that room with her, can I just tell you, I'm so glad that I had embodiment training, because the amount of centering and deep breathing that I was having to do to not have that moment be about me.
Yeah.
You are here in service, sister. You need to just take it down a notch. And it was work. And then, and I mentioned this just a second ago, but so I wasn't asking any questions. I am literally just the tech host. And there's tons of stuff that was not going wrong with the tech, but it was the most challenging technological room that I had had to hold up to that point, because like, you know, you pin speakers together so that they can be seen together. And I had pinned them, but I was getting all of this stuff from the chat saying, I can't see both of them. And they were angry. They were like angry that they weren't able to see, because there was so much silence in the panel. You know, I mean, Dr. Schwartz was, he essentially was, I mean, they were having a conversation about the work, but then he was essentially coaching her as well. He was like taking her through some of the deeper questions and sort of like a demo of sorts. I mean, you know, she consented, of course, she was totally game, but there was a lot of silence where he would ask a question and she was like checking in with herself. She'd have her eyes to the side and she would, you know, kind of tilt her head and be thinking or looking and breathing a certain way. And they couldn't see her. And I'm like freaking out internally because I'm like, yeah. Anyway, it was tough. It was a great panel. And then at the end, I think it was Stephanie Dano was moderating. And at the very end, you know, the protocol was that we say our goodbyes, and then the tech host, me, ends the call. And Stephanie had messaged me and said, you know, don't, you know, just stop the recording, because, you know, it would have been nice to do a debrief afterwards, everybody else but the four of us in the room, to be able to sort of come down from the session. And I didn't get the message in time. And I ended the call and it was like an abrupt end. All four of us went off into our separate parts of the world. And I was like, I just hung up on Alanis Morissette. Oh my God.
Sarah, no.
It's like in the moment, I'm like, how did you just totally disconnected, literally and metaphorically. Like what? Anyway, that was my brush. That was my brush with Alanis. Yeah. Alanis, if you ever see this, I just want you to know how sorry I am I didn't get to enjoy a conversation with you or just hear you debrief, but also how meaningful that conversation was, and how much your work and your evolution, your transparency as an artist, and your willingness to evolve out loud in real time, how beautiful and important that's been to me and so many others. I know I'm not the only one.
Oh, it's beautiful.
This for you. How were you connected to her, and what role did she play for you?
Well, I mean, I did like her music growing up, but in that instance, getting to hear her work with internal family systems, because I really love internal family systems, being able to see myself, and I loved her constantly referring to her Alanis as her capital S self, and like holding that strong center amidst all the parts that she knows are there. And I remember being like oogly about the fact that she was drinking water out of a mason jar. Because it was all about me at that point. Because I was like, guys, a lot of drinks out of mason jars. Look at her mason jar. And it's like, I think it's just fun to fangirl sometimes.
Yeah.
And to like relate over stuff like that. And she was also in this beautiful library. And yeah, she's a lovely, lovely person. And
she being even in a Zoom room with her, there's I don't say this a lot, but like, there's a light from within. She is a person that has a light from within. You know what I mean? There is something very alive in her and at peace and solid. Like she's just, it's just very unique.
Because she was very open as well with her struggles, and to watch her go through like a kind of a coaching and like get to hear some of her very human worries and struggles and strong emotions and sadness around motherhood. She was very open with that. And I love how you said, what did you just say? Like how to process in real time.
Out loud in real time. Yeah.
Like that's beautiful. I aspire to be that strong and vulnerable, which I think is part of why I'm doing this. And like I love to talk to people through, like we say, like this is the unfolding. This isn't this thing I'm working up to do, even though I called you a year and a half ago with this idea. It's a journey. So cool. What did you have any other because we both worked a lot on the embodiment conference and got to see the inner workings of the largest online conference in the world up until this point, and how absolutely insane of a project it was, but how cool it was that 1 million people actually came together in a time when COVID really had shut down the world. And to check in with, I was in breakout rooms and Zoom rooms with people from all over the world. You had dozens of countries and languages in the chat, and it connected me in a way in a positive light in a time when the world was connected in a negative way. I felt like we were in total, it unified the world in a way that highlighted like trauma and negative impact. But if you had an internet connection and a device to tune in for that, what did you see as like the positive outcome for that project specifically?
Oh my gosh, for myself or for like the world in general?
Both.
But what was so interesting for me was oh my gosh, it was such a rich experience for all of the reasons that you're saying, right? Like I had never connected to the entire world like that, being in conversation. And, we had the embodiment, the embodied yoga principles circle that we were doing for a time. And, people from Australia coming in consistently, or, it was a masterclass in connection and curiosity, humility, and like beauty in the midst of uncertainty. And I was so surprised by what was possible in a virtual environment. Yeah. To be able to practice, it was both. I didn't know anything about working online before that conference happened. And I came out of the pandemic with a pretty killer virtual facilitation skill set that I hadn't even intended to cultivate. And it was an astonishing event coming together. I can't believe that it happened. The team of people that made it happen, and how Mark and his team of people brought it all together, that the entire embodiment community rallied to service in this way. Just incredible. And I think you're right to point to, COVID had disconnected us. It had shut down. It had shattered all the illusions about how the world works. It totally shattered it. And in the midst of having all of that loss and grief and uncertainty, there was a place to come together and hold space and be held in all of the things that were being felt. And so to be able to show up and be of service in that way was hugely important for me, even to help me process my own grief and my own uncertainty, like not knowing what to do, not knowing how to be in the world, and knowing that, complete isolation and separation was not going to be good for me.
Yeah.
It just, I'm so humbled by that experience. And as you mentioned, sort of like everything broke down and there was all this grief and loss and uncertainty. I think of other times when I've experienced that. And it was, the first time that I really experienced that was, and we don't need to talk too much about this, but, I just moved to New York after 9/11, or right before 9/11. So I was like 4 months a New Yorker when 9/11 happened. So I'm still finding my footing and pretty uncertain, didn't know very much, didn't know many people, only the people that I had started to work with. And I remember, now that I have the context of the world shutting down in March of 2020, or at least the US world, and theater going completely dark, which I was doing shows at the time, which was anyway. But I have the context of COVID now to look back at what happened at 9/11 and recognize that there are some parallels there, about the uncertainty and the fear and not knowing if the stuff of the world as we knew it was going to continue. Like how does the world go on, number one, and number two, now that we know what we know about the world, that this illusion that it works a certain way is not necessarily real. How do we as humans re-enter and re-engage and move forward in a way, in a life that has meaning and purpose? And what do we hang, what are the metrics, right? How do we make decisions when at any moment the status quo that we thought we were working towards, or the things that we thought we were striving for, might be stripped away? Did they really matter? What's important? And I feel like those questions came up after 9/11, certainly in the world of New York, but the pandemic has brought that forward as well. And I think there's so many different questions that people are asking about, how do you measure what's worth it? What's the point of anything, and how do we measure it? Or how do we make those decisions? How do you gauge? And the more embodied we are, the more connected we are to ourselves and others, the better equipped we are to answer those big, huge, important questions.
I mean, for some reason, I'm thinking of like a big lesson for me in the embodiment conference was that felt sense of stress, even though my body wasn't doing anything in the world. Like I wasn't out there. I wasn't getting stressed at school or class, or because I was going to and from places. I mean, I remember, like you talk about the stress of dealing with it, being a tech host. I was a tech host on a panel where it was Miles Kessler and a lot of other really cool meditation teachers. And I admire Miles a lot. And I'd taken some classes with him and was like, okay, I'm going to and Stephanie was the host too, and she was like, oh, Sarah knows what she's doing, and I just messed it up completely. And my internet, there's a huge storm going on in Kansas City at the time, and I just bombed it. And I remember people were like, take a walk, like go take a walk. It takes a while for that cortisol to drain out. And that was this like aha moment, like, oh, that's what I'm feeling.
Yeah.
Like there was no stimuli other than my mind to cause that stress. Like I knew there was real-time consequences, and all it was my screen being weird on people's screens. But like to feel no other input than just that flood within me was such a lesson in like, oh, because it was a weird thing to like be so connected to my computer for the embodiment conference, because it was like it was me not moving my body so that other people could like that service, right, of like, this is a weird beautiful thing that I feel like trapped or something. I don't know where I was going with all that, but
oh God, but that's so potent, Sarah, right? To recognize like they're like, even without these obvious external, the things that we attribute stress to so readily aren't required. Like they aren't required, right? Like it doesn't have to be breakup of a relationship or the loss of a job or the stress of a deadline. It can simply be.
It can just be
in
my head.
This moment is so big and important, and I got to do it right. It's like an internally created stress, but it's based in stuff that's real for you, right? Like there was a very important person in the room. The same with me and with Alanis, where I was like, oh my God, I can't mess this up, right? So yeah, but that's great. That I love, what a relief to have somebody say, yeah, there's a timeline and a structure and a science to how we process stress. So sitting here and continuing to wring our hands is not how you process stress. Getting up and moving your body and like taking a walk and like, I mean, that's so empowering, right? So much of, yeah, go ahead.
Just, that it's a physical thing that I need to actually work and keep moving so that this thing is physically running through my body, can keep moving.
Yes. Yeah. We're not doing it wrong. We just haven't ever been taught how to process the stress. Just remove the stressor does not mean that you have processed the stress. There's a fantastic book called Burnout by doctors Amelia and Emily Nagoski. They're sisters. And they talk about that fact. Just because you remove the thing that causes the stress does not mean that you've processed the stress in your body. And so the reality is, we think that just because we can acknowledge like, oh, well, this shouldn't be causing me stress, or that's really not that, like a first world problem. Okay, cool. Good that you acknowledge that, but you still have all this stress juice. I think they say in the book, we're all hopped up on stress juice and we don't know what to do, Yeah. So
because it gives us an edge, right? Like it's that little thing that keeps us alive. Michael Moore, an herbalist, the Southwest School of Botanical Medicine, big props. He wrote this book on organ system energetics, and like that thing that ignites our nervous system gives us this hyper vigilant focus that actually that sense of aliveness that we can feel things differently. Like that's addictive. And like all that stress juice really is an addiction, because it helps me feel more alive in my body. Like, but and for me, that's why it was such a big like lesson in, I am so stressed to the point of tears, and all I'm doing is looking at a screen. And like to acknowledge, oh, this like coursing thing, like this physical thing through my body has to be moved. was just a reminder why the embodiment conference, you know, and like I kind of
Oh my
like
God. Yeah.
complain about like how it sucked me to a computer, but like that was the point. That's why 1 million people tuned in, to be reminded that, you know, it's okay. It's okay to be stuck in isolation, and there's and still maintain that piece of your humanity, that you're allowed to move. You
Yes.
can be stuck, but as long as you have a body and the freedom to move in this space, like do that right now.
Do it.
That's
Yeah.
one. And the last thing I'll say about the embodiment conference is just that for that reason, I'm realizing is that because I get because there was a lot of negative. I asked about positive, but and I mentioned some negatives about the embodiment conference, but there was a lot of negative stuff online around the embodiment conference at the time as well, and even
Yeah.
afterward, and people, you know, all the shit there. And I'll just say I as a big, there was a lot of social justice related things
Yeah.
in that too, and my reason for highlighting the negativity around it is that I wish some of those cool voices that pulled out wouldn't have, because I love some of those people, and I wish that at a time of global what's the word, coming together, you know, the embodiment conference did bring a lot of different people together and in the name of something good. And
Yeah.
I think they had good things to add to the conversation, and I
Yeah.
wish they
Yeah. I'd
would.
agree. It was that time period, and it continues, right? Our
Mhm.
wrestling with how to um, how to be with all like new awareness and new language and new movement, literally and metaphorically, with many social justice
Mhm.
issues. We're still finding our footing with it. And,
Yeah.
I realized it's interesting, and I appreciate that you bring it up. At the time that it was happening, I can look back and recognize that my default was to immediately go to reading, education, watching a whole bunch of videos. Like I moved around many of those issues. I moved completely into mind space, head space, intellectual, like I must learn. And there were only a handful of spaces where they were looking at and talking about and exploring and guiding, and I needed to be guided, of course, in an embodied way into a lot of the inquiry around those issues. And I agree that it would have been really wonderful to have those additional voices in the mix, particularly at that time. And I just wonder how the conversation, how and where the conversation around some of those challenges and other aspects would be right now, if they had been in the mix, and sort of what would have been in birth because of that giant global platform for them to speak about the things that they're so they're so beautifully equipped to share and help us all learn. So
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I hadn't thought of that. I hadn't thought of like where the conversation could be, because in my eyes it was too big to be represented by one anything.
yeah,
But the desire to like not align or not be associated or associate, or I'm only going to be associated by calling it out, or
yeah,
I
yeah,
get that a little bit. And I also get that, yeah, maybe it makes room for new conversations. And then, I mean, yeah, at this point, like maybe we can thread together something new. And it was a hard time though, to be sure.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. With that embodiment training, my question around the embodied yoga principle specifically, because we were doing an online circle leading up to the conference about embodied yoga principles. And I don't think we've even articulated what that is. So if people are interested in what that even is, do you think you could answer that kind of in the way that it's changed your personal and professional life?
How becoming an EYP practitioner has changed and learning that?
Yeah, because that's kind of in all of this work with Embodiment Unlimited, that group of people, like those trainers.
Sure.
Yeah, it's kind of a little, it's not really a community, it's more like a mycelial network of global people who are attached in different ways.
I love that. Oh, a mycelial network. Hello, nature.
I also got that language from a multi-potentialite, like a nonlinear thinker named Perry, who I also interviewed about human.
Wow, what a great framework.
Yeah. But we're really, I mean, a lot of us who are connected through embodied yoga principles use it either in coaching or in group classes. Or my first training when I flew to the UK to do my first EYP training in Brighton was like, I think I even told my husband this recently, like I flew to England to like learn about myself. Like it was purely like a self-growth thing. And then when I took the training again, I was like, oh, this is an amazing teaching modality. And then the further coaching level, like the more I got into it, I'm like, as a coach, like this is something I do with one-on-one people now, like with coaching. So like how did it affect you? You know, because I remember it's like this, it was like group therapy, somatic group therapy, and we're you know, next to each other on yoga mats, go like in with the partner work too, like, oh my God, we're learning so much. How? Why? What is this?
What have I done? I
can't unsee it. I can't unsee
right
it.
That's the thing, you can't unknow it once you know it. Or well, you can, but it's like it's willful, and you know, denial is powerful. But so context wise, you know, it's worth noting, you know, what we were just talking about with stress and recognizing like I'm experiencing all this stress and all I'm doing is looking at a screen. So I came to the body and embodiment and EYP in 2018. I took my first yoga class ever in late 2016, early 2017. I'd never done yoga before. Would not have fancied myself to be a body oriented person. I did gymnastics, as I said, when I was a kid, and then I summarily divorced from my body for the next 20 years, right? So yeah, when I started doing yoga, it was at like an SOS, like I need help situation where my friend Julie Chapman, it was like, maybe you come to yoga with me. And my first yoga class was with this fantastic woman. Shout out to Lizzie Brooks. She is one of my favorite yoga teachers ever. And it just, I was shocked at how much emotion I felt at experiencing my body. Now, it's important to note that I have been in recovery to varying degrees from perfectionism for all of my life. So doing yoga, one of the things that was very emotional was I'm in my body. But number two, that was number one. Number two is I didn't know the rules and I couldn't execute perfectly. And that was really uncomfortable. And it was also really exciting on some level because I kept going back to it. But that moment in time in 2015, when I left my teaching job, teaching scenic design and creativity at university, which was highly physical, right? I'm painting sets, I'm crawling around on scenery, I'm lifting things, I'm, you know, it's just all over the place. And that's the work I did for about 20 years. And in 2015, I was moving to Austin with my now husband, who was teaching at University of Texas. I had left the university I was at to join a consulting firm that was located in New Jersey, but we were located in Austin, Texas. And so I was remote before the pandemic, before remote work was a ubiquitous thing. And is that the right word? Ubiquitous? Widely known? Widely used? Anyway. So I went from being super, super physical all the time for most of my days to standing at a desk, staring at a screen alone in a home office. I had no community. I had moved to a city where I didn't really know many people. It was a shock. It was like a shocking shift. And it was fantastic for like the first year and a half, couple of years. I loved the change in the work, the change in the challenges. I knew the people that I was working with. I'd worked with them 20 years prior. My boss, I had worked with in my first job in New York City. So, like there were so many things to love about this job, and I liked the work, but I was physically and emotionally declining. And it was the isolation and this being singular all the time, being physically still all the time. My body started to stiffen. My range of motion changed. I didn't know that this was what was happening, but my emotional stability, like my baseline of being okay, was deteriorating. And so I started doing yoga, and that helped. In 2018, I'm not exactly sure how I even recognized that there was an EYP training happening. I think I saw something from Joyce Ayers, who, we're frozen again. Are we unfrozen? Okay.
You're good.
Joyce, who trained with you, right? Or was she? Yeah. Okay.
Well, no, she must have done a training in the UK before me, because
she did EFC. That's right.
Well, I thought she did embodied yoga principles before me too, because when Hannah and I went to the UK, went to Brighton in I don't know, I thought it was 2018, but maybe it was 2017 if you're saying Austin was 2018. I don't know, but whenever that was, we were the first three. So Joyce, Hannah, and me were the first American.
US.
Yeah, and so
look at you, pioneer.
Huh?
Look at you, pioneer.
I know. And that's why we came to Austin, Hannah and I. And it was great that we did. And that's where we met Joyce and welcomed in the new American trainees. And now there's an online training. And so there's plenty.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that I must have seen something from Joyce and like the announcement. And I thought, I was just discovering, I just landed on this word embodiment. And so I, like the good little researcher I am, I was devouring information about what this meant. And I'm in yoga. And so I'm learning about like the more sort of like spiritual, maybe esoteric parts of it. And I was like a kid in a candy store. And I was like, the first US training of this modality is in the US and it's in Austin. Like, I gotta go. Like, the gods have spoken. This is something I need to do. And so I took a chance and I did it. And so that's all the context. Getting back to your question about, how has it affected me and how has it sort of like changed who and how I am as a person and a practitioner? Is that the question?
Yeah. Well, your context kind of sets it up in a great way for me to understand.
Yeah.
At what point it came into your life is very interesting.
Well, it's so important because I just, doing that training, it was not unlike learning devising in theater for the first time, where, as a designer, being in a very specific designer box, I knew my role. And there were certain things that were my responsibility. I was in charge of this, and that was my prescribed role. And devising makes you go outside of the box. And suddenly the box disappears or the walls fall away. And it's not like there's no structure, but, you have to meet with and experiment with and get honest with yourself about whether or not you're going to let yourself tell yourself the truth about something. So that's what me, it's like, so for those of you that don't know it, we didn't really explain what EYP is. It's called embodied yoga principles, but it's really about taking the learning of yoga off the mat and into your life. And part of what was so attractive to me about it was the very practical function of it, because yoga feels good, but I didn't understand, like, why can't I feel this good in my, short of throwing over my entire life and becoming a yogi and becoming a yoga teacher, which is totally fine, right? Like, I was in a yoga teacher training for a while. But short of throwing over my whole life and dedicating all of it to doing yoga all the time, how do I take this sort of like constant trajectory of awareness, learning, inner experience, and outer existence? How do I do that? And embodied yoga principles is essentially 26 postures or poses that you put yourself in. So it's not as physical as yoga. It's accessible to bodies of all abilities. It's non-esoteric. So it's you may have your own sort of associations in that regard, but the framework and the modality itself has no spiritual or esoteric bent in particular. So these 26 poses give you the opportunity to put yourself into a physical posture and stay in the posture for a little bit as you go through an intentional inquiry. So our bodies, embodiment is all about how our ways of being physically shape us and how our physical shape affects our way of being. And so being in a posture and holding it for long enough that your body begins to default into its default position. And you can begin to recognize, is this posture familiar to me? Is this unfamiliar? What do I notice that I'm doing? Am I efforting in it? And boy, I was efforting a lot. Like, my perfectionist tendencies, I was like, execute it perfectly. This is not an EYP pose, don't worry. But like, I think at the time, it just highlighted for me how tightly I was gripping everything. Like, there was a grasping and a desperation that I felt in my life because I was struggling so much emotionally and physically at home in this work environment that I was in. And it had nothing to do with the work, right? And so to recognize that my mental state, I could say, yes, I'm grasping, but to begin to recognize how it was showing up in my physical body and why I felt so physically wrecked from standing at a computer or sitting at a desk, and being given a framework to begin to ask questions about not only what's the truth about this for you? Like, is it familiar? Okay, what about that? Right? Like, it gives you the opportunity to make a choice, to shift it, to try something out. It's a little bit like experimenting. Like, what if you did 10% less? How does that change how it feels? Or what if you changed something about a hand position? Does that feel more sustainable? Right? So I just had never considered asking questions in the body like this. And it was the most eye-opening experience I'd ever had. And it opened a door into self-discovery that I didn't know was closed. My associations with devising, my understanding of like the times in my life when I have felt most creatively alive, I began to connect some dots, like a thread that had been in existence in my life for a very long time that I I didn't know, but my aliveness, I experienced my aliveness most when I was most embodied. Of course, that's not a profound statement, but I didn't know that that's part of what was required. So EYP was utterly transformational. And as you said earlier, once you see it, you can't unsee it. So that sort of set in motion, I began to really open physically and emotionally to the possibility that, what if this work that I'm currently doing, which was design and architecture, and, it was my identity as a designer, or my identity was as a designer. And that I was so miserable doing the thing I identified myself with was devastating. Embodiment gave me a framework. Does that resonate?
Yeah, for a little different reason.
Yeah, sure.
Well, yeah, I can speak to that after you finish.
Yeah, okay. Well, I just embodiment gave me a framework to begin to recognize that my identity is not my job. And if it's not my job, what else could it be? Like, if not my job, which is how I've always identified myself, what else then? And that's a big question. And I, not for nothing, this is a question that was happening for me in midlife. In 2018, I was 43 years old. So there's also this layer of like, everybody else has this figured out already, right? Like I'm so late to the party. And Mark, I think, is a fantastic teacher for anyone that feels that way, because he's just so matter of fact about it, right? It's just like, yeah, you come to the work when you come to it. You're not that special. You're very special. You're not that special, right? Like it's both and, right? Welcome to the party.
It's a both and world.
Yeah. So that's sort of it. I mean, that was the entry point. I feel like the seed got planted during that training is when Mark talked about Newfield Network. He talked about ontological coaching. He did a lot of trainings with Newfield for them, working with their trainers and helping with their curriculum, I believe. He talked about these different approaches to embodiment coaching, and not in an in-depth way, but in enough of a way that I was like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. I have to know more. So that in 2019, by the time 2019 rolled around in January, and I really had embraced that it was time for me to switch gears. And I left my job without anything to go to. I was very lucky that we were my husband and I were in a place geographically and financially that he was able to sustain me figuring it out. And I hadn't even at that time decided I was going to become a coach. I kind of quit and I let the dust settle. And slowly that idea began to make more and more sense until I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna enroll, I'm gonna become a coach. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm doing this. I can't believe I'm doing this. I'm doing this. I am so committed to this. And like, it just felt like an almost undeniable evolution of the work that matters the most to me in the world. And it made the most sense given the context of where I'd come from with creativity and design and perfectionism and being physical and being still. So it was, what's that?
And being present.
Yeah.
I think that's another gift of yours is the way that you are a connector. You connect within yourself and those and like with who you're working with. I've experienced that in a way that like you really hear and see and feel what someone is in and with. And like that's your gift as a coach. That's why you're a coach. You're so good at it.
Thank you for saying that. I'm really humbled to hear you reflect that. Thank you.
And as something else you said earlier, really, aside from the identity thing, which I still struggle with identity, but you said that I'm not going to misquote you, but something like you didn't realize that feeling fully alive, like being in your body, was a part of that equation. Is that what you said? Like,
yeah,
that resonated for me too. Like that feeling of being fully alive, like being acknowledging, like I am here in this body. Like, wow, that's the thing that helps that. Like, like going back to Paul's student who like felt most alive when in physical confrontation. It's like, actually, maybe that's the only thing, thing that called him into his body was aggression, and like, finding other pathways to connection with the body. Can bring forth that aliveness.
And in the absence of knowing any other way, what are we left with, right? And that embodiment coaching, I think, is so powerful because there are many different ways of being. Anger in and of itself, not a bad thing. It's a signal. It's something about what's important to us. When we enact anger and we are reacting rather than responding, and we're not connected to ourselves and the reality of the what and the why of the anger, we're clear about it. When we're not connected in that way, that's when it can get destructive, right? So embodiment teaches us different ways of moving in and out of or being with what is, and being choiceful about that. It's so powerful.
Yeah. Choiceful around identity is a new concept to me. Because what resonated was identifying with it, like in the midst of lockdown when I was getting some unemployment, thankfully, and at the end of that, when part of it was applying for jobs, I was like, I want to find a job that I was just applying to all sorts of nutrition related jobs because that was what my degree is for. I have a bachelor's in science in dietetics. And so I became a dietary aide at a nursing home because I'm crazy, because they're like, don't go to nursing homes. And I'm like, let's work at a nursing home and see what it's like in the middle of, And, but what I found was that I was a part of this food system that I learned to despise. And I went back using my formal education to do literally what I was trained to do, work with everyone in this facility, their specific dietary requirements, and kind of acknowledging like, this isn't health. And I feel like I had that reckoning through college. Like, here I am learning about the nutrition, like the medical system from the lens of a nutritionist and dietitians. And it's like that I knew it in college, and it took me however long from college till then, like really striving to fit that identity. And it wasn't until that job that I was like, damn it, like this isn't what I want. And I felt like I was clinging on to that identity nutritionist in a way that I was like, well, this can't be where I do it. This can't be the place that I get to express that. And just letting go of, I like how you said earlier too, like that education, that it was architecture that did give you those tools, because I feel like, even though I'm not using my formal education in the formal pathway that literally it was designed to take me to, I am so grateful for that gift and being able to see the food system for what it really is, because I got to see how the funding and the associations and why does Coke sponsor, like, why do they own all the food that we feed old people in nursing homes? Like, what? And I'm really grateful for that, despite the shatter of identity that
and it feels that way, right? Like, it feels like,
because the investment was so real, and it's like I chose it because I cared. I chose it because I was like, oh, that's a great pathway where things matter, and fuck, it doesn't matter. And so bad. But that's why that's why I am where I am. You know, EYP in that workshop, we were supposed to come up with our own poses. And I think you were my partner because we came up with shelter pose. Like we took grounded pose where you're rooted into the ground, and we added the hands up here for shelter. And I've thought I think I remember you were my partner because someone took a picture of us doing that pose. And I think it wasn't maybe just us, but in the photo. But I come back to why that's an archetypal way of being that matters to me. Why is it that being grounded and adding that sense of protection, why does that matter? And that leads into the home topic that I want to get into. And I feel like we've been talking for a long time. So maybe I'll try to like tie this all together in a place of being in the world, because I really want to talk to you about the relationships that are formed at home. And there was once upon a time that we were on a friend call with some other EYP, and you were talking about struggling with your relationship with your father. And so much of this work, I mean, EYP is a relational practice, and so taking the work back home is kind of what the work is for. And I remember at the time I said something that was just like, I felt like it was just rude because it was something that someone else told me, because what I said was, you were struggling with like saying things, and something like you regretted or something like that. And I said something that I was wrestling with at the time was saying things that can't be taken back. And I think I at the time was really wrestling with like relationships, the idea of relationships that are just permanently damaged. And maybe that's not a part of my question now. Maybe it is, because now years later I and doing so much work in my marriage lately, like I really, despite things that can't be taken back, despite damage that lasts forever, I am also a big believer in repair and like the beauty that pulling in repair can do amidst that damage. And I am also on a journey with my father right now, and as always, but like working specifically with repair so that the future can be different than the past. And so maybe it's EYP related, coaching related, ontological related, but can you speak to your relationship with your dad in a way that I'm looking for hope, and I'm looking for other people to have a sense of hope. But my question isn't clear, so I'm just wondering what's coming up for you, or like where you feel like that's going.
Sure. Yeah. So if I were to complete your question, what was coming forward for me, tell me if this feels like a good way to think about it. But I would have completed that question, or I was inclined to complete it by saying, how has EYP or ontological coaching or creative, how have these threads sort of like come in to support, help inform, and contribute to you working through your relationship with your dad? Is that kind of the territory you want me to look at.
Yeah, and suddenly I'm like, oh, I'm here mentioning repair with my husband and my father and masculinity as a whole. I'm reading the heroine's journey right now, because I
Oof.
feel like for years I embodied the hero's journey, and I idealized, growing up in a church where women didn't have leadership roles. Like, all of my role models and things I aspired to be were male or masculine in my eyes. And seeing now all the ways that I've pulled in like that yang feminine energy and just like synthesized it in a cool way, now I can like reach out to the masculine and have this repair work within me. And so yeah, I love that you finished that thought, and even it reflected back to me like, it's not even about dads anymore. It's like the whole man versus woman. Like,
That's so beautiful, Sarah. And it resonates so much with me that there's, there are these bigger, I'm going to use the word concept, which is a little bit divorced from the depth and the humanness of it, but like these bigger concepts of being, masculinity, femininity, even the archetypes can help us here as well. But like, we have these relationships to these aspects of our identity that we're so unaccustomed to teasing it out, or like taking a critical view of it. Critical meaning, with a magnifying glass, and like really trying to understand it, not critical, like shaming it, or, this is not criticism, but a critical view of it. And you're so right. It's like, what I'm hearing, and tell me if this is not true for you, but what I'm hearing is like, you recognize it's a bigger relationship to the masculine, this masculine energy, the way that masculinity manifests for you, your interpretation of it from childhood and growing up around whatever version of it you grew up around, and how you manifested that. And I mean that in the very practical sense, how you put that to work in your life.
Yeah.
You're recognizing that there's something that doesn't quite work for you about that anymore, and it needs a refresh. It needs a realistic look, and recognizing that this way of being shows up in your relationship with your husband, with your father. Like, these are the beautiful opportunities that present themselves, and they're gifts, right? It's a gift just in this way. And I'm not trying to minimize the difficulty or the stress of anything. But when we have these challenges in relationship, it's a gift and opportunity to be able to take a moment to consider, how is my way of being contributing or interacting or integrating or synthesizing with this unique dynamic to create the conditions that are not acceptable to me? It's like, what's my role in this? And not as a means of punishment, but as a means of like better understanding, like, how am I being with this? And what, not only do I not want it to be this, but like, if not this, then what else? What does that require of me? What does that require of somebody else? What do I need that other person to be, do, or say? So it's so complex, because yes, there's the individual, and then there's the we, and that's where it gets really tricky.
Have you gone on that journey with your father?
I have, to a certain degree. So for me, I'm trying to, I don't know if I need some sort of like global explanation or context about my dad. I guess I'll say that I'm a lot like my dad. I don't know that my dad would agree with me when I say this next thing. Very emotional, lots of emotions, but my dad is wrapped in a scientist package. But he has a depth of emotion and a depth of creativity. He plays the guitar. He's funny. He's goofy. He's delighted. He's got like a childlike thing in him. And I remember, I mean, I was daddy's little girl growing up.
Me too.
And it was, I felt very seen and very understood during certain stages of my life with my dad. And the older I got, the more difficult that became and the less connected I felt to him. A lot of that was also just the dynamic of the marriage and the household that my mom and dad had. You know, my mom was in charge of the girls. I have an older sister, and my mom took care of all that. My dad earned the money. It was very sort of like traditional nuclear family in that way. And my dad was brilliant. You know, he was like a brilliant scientist. And so he existed in a world where, and this is the way I describe it, I think he would agree with this, but you know, my mom contextualized the world for him. He did his thing. And when he needed to come and participate, mom would pull him back. Charlie, come on. It's time to, we got to go to this concert. We got to go to this game. Your daughter needs help. Your daughter needs therapy. She's anorexic. So it's like at a certain point, I was able to acknowledge that like what, for a long time, I felt like my dad just wasn't able to show up for me. There is a dynamic dance that existed. It's kind of an agreement or an unspoken contract between my mom and my dad. And that's the way that he existed in the world, right? Whenever he was needed, he was told and he was sort of like pulled into the action, given an intelligence briefing, and then he could be there, right? So over the years, you know, my relationship with my dad has been, it continued to be contextualized through my mom. You know, I had my own challenges with my mom at a certain point, but my mom passed away when I was 33, and her illness was like 10 months long, and I lived not very far from them. So I had the opportunity to go and help with that. And I think that was a time, that was a really pivotal learning point for me with my relationship with my dad, because my dad was struggling a lot. He, you know, like the one person in the whole world who was his partner in everything was needing his help in ways that I don't know if he didn't know how to rise to the challenge, but I think it was distressing in a way that it was clouding. You know, he was a scientist, so the way that he could help with this was to do the research and find the treatment and, you know, have the conversations with doctors and all this kind of stuff. And I was there to kind of fulfill a different role. I think I was sort of the emotional, the keeper of the more emotional and sort of like watery parts of that. Fast forwarding, we don't need to get into the weeds with that, but I saw my dad in a different light through that. I saw him as a very human being. And, you know, I recognized in that moment that my expectation in that moment, in that season, you know, I was really able to see that my expectations of my dad were rooted in what I believe was a very young yearning to be seen and approved of and patted on the head and given a certain kind of like a thumbs up or a atta girl, you know, like some kind of reinforcement from him that really wasn't his to give anymore. And that was a really scary moment because it was pointing me in the direction of my own sovereignty in a different way. Mm. So, you know, the 10 years, oh my gosh, it's almost 15 years since she passed. there's been a lot of ebb and flow and a lot of changes in my relationship with him. I was in New York at that time. He moved to Texas right after she passed, and needed a lot of help getting set up. And so I participated in that. Eventually, I came back to Texas, and I was in Texas for 9.5 years up until 13 days ago. And during that time, you know, he has found a new partner who's wonderful and he loves very much. And he now has a different kind of dance going on, right? So he has a new person that he dances with, literally and metaphorically. And she's not my mom. She has a lot of the same qualities that I think my father loved in my mom, but she is wholly her own person. And it's been really beautiful to see her require different things of my dad and to see him engage in the beautiful learning that goes along with figuring out how to be with somebody new. I mean, she's not new. She's been in his life for over 10 years now, but watching that dance and seeing him ebb and flow, learn, grow in ways with this person that he chose, recognizing that my expectations and my hopes for how my relationship with him could be, if he would just, if only this, if only that, right? And recognizing that my expectations and my frustrations, I wasn't really speaking them directly. So I wasn't, I wasn't directly asking him for these things. I was sort of expecting that that there would be some sort of like evolution into our relationship becoming a certain kind of way. And the whole while, what I began to recognize was I was not seeing my father for who he is. And I was so focused on trying to figure out how to get him to be who I wanted him to be, that I was missing out on the person he is and what he is able to, how he is able to and wants to be in relationship with me, which is not bad. Like I was wanting my relationship with my dad to take care of some stuff that I needed to take care of for myself. And I can't say that I'm fully done with that work, in me. I don't know that I'll ever be done, but it's evolved. And I guess I have to say that the place that I'm at now is, I accept my dad for who he is, and I'm able to enjoy him for what our relationship has to offer in this season. He'll be 70, he is 79. So he's, entering a season of life where he's very reflective and looking back at and sort of zoomed way out, taking in the big picture. And, I, by contrast, feel like, I zoom out and in, but all of my work is about the inner life and understanding and exploring and the value of being in that process with yourself and with others. And frankly, it's not a process that he is curious about, not in the way that I am. And that's not an indictment of me. It has nothing to do with whether or not he loves me, cares about me, or is curious about me. It's just that I at some point had decided that if my relationship with my dad was meaningful, it needed to look a certain way. And once I started to let go of that expectation, I've been much more able to enjoy him as a human and enjoy the time that I have with him and be in relationship with him in a way that is possible and is real time. I'm not living in some fantasy of the future. I'm not trying to dredge up past incidences and, have a reckoning about it. I've been able to sort of tease out what's my part of this and what is the way that I want to be with him. And that fundamental question actually came out of time with my mom when she was sick, recognizing that she's not going to come out of this. And so if everybody else is looking for a cure or the next treatment or whatever, that's fine. But for me, in that hospital room or, next to the bed at home, rubbing her feet, putting lotion on her hands, just like, what do I want my time with my mom to be like? What do I want it to be about? And I choose connection. So we carved that and we defined that in every moment that we had together, right? It wasn't a conversation we had, but in my commitment to being connected to myself and to her in that process, it defined itself. And I kind of have that same philosophy with my dad. I'm going to stay connected to who I am. And I'm going to do my best to genuinely connect with my dad. And in that, in committing to that, we are finding a relationship and defining it as we go. And it's rich and it's beautiful. And I'm happy to say that it's not about being fraught about anything. It just is, it's just it's just being connected, I guess, is what I would say about that. Yeah, I'm going to pause. I feel like I'm sort of coming to a natural, like a wrap up of that thought, which was very long. But is that helpful or interesting?
That's very interesting. And the all I have to say, I have a lot to say always, but what it feels important to say right now is that you are so beautiful. And I think that hearing you describe that is helpful for me, is resonant for me. I think that you're describing work that is hard and important and beautiful. And in some ways, for me anyway, is something to aspire to. Is I choose connection. I am not going to live as the afraid little girl anymore, or whatever, all the other things. But yeah, thank you for going there and sharing.
Thanks for reflecting that, and I appreciate you helping me understand what resonated with you. And we don't always have the opportunity to, like in sharing with you, you are helping me in asking that question. You're helping me synthesize something about this journey that I've been on with my dad. That he probably doesn't even think we've been on a journey together, right? But it's so special to be able to be in conversation about these very deep and meaningful things. So thank you very much for asking the complex question. And it's very helpful. I appreciate you holding space for it.
Absolutely. It could easily not be done, I think. And I think I see it in a lot of relationships, and I can see it in myself, in my fight flight. I'm a flighter, I'm a runner. And I can see how it could just easily not be done. I could easily just not connect. But I want to. And I'm inspired by your choice, your active choice to choose love and connection. And thankful for your humanity, which I have on home and humanity. I want to ask a couple rapid fire questions.
I will mainly try and be as rapid as possible, because brevity is not my strong suit. I will try.
Well, mainly because I want to get I want to get to the story at the end. And
Okay.
and I'm just curious if you could synthesize some answers for these, because I think you're so wise, and I love to hear the context, but I also am just curious. I want to philosophize on this so
Yep.
much, but my brain is also starting to get tired, and I wonder if yours
Right on.
is. Since this is the Home for Our Humanity podcast,
Yeah.
and I'm just thinking also about the farm animals I'm going to go feed, and they can wait. So if you want to philosophize about this, we can. But I have a few questions, like, how has having a home you love helped you shape the philosophy you live by?
You mean a literal physical home?
Yes.
Okay. It matters a lot. Oh, what were you going to say?
I was gonna say, or is it the body of the home? But no, I think that's really my question. Is yes, the physical home. Because I recently, I mentioned I moved, but where I was very transitional, and only like less than 2 months, about 2 months ago, I moved into a different place, and the felt sense of like my creativity is different, and the way I connect, and then my desires are different. And so that's my question: is how is having a home that you love help shape the philosophy you live by?
Having a home that I love has made a big difference. Like I said, we just moved into this new house. We're renting a house in Mesa, Arizona, and it is very different from the house that we moved from in Elgin, Texas. And so that we loved that house, but that house was very low ceilings, low slung. It was like a mid-century sort of quiet little cozy bungalow, and it was perfect. Yeah, it was perfect during pandemic times. We moved there in 2020, and it was just a perfect. It was like a little being held gently in a warm, cozy place. We had more space. It was a beautiful yard. We connected with nature differently. So having that home during that season, provided a kind of, for me, it was like a safety, like a physical safety and a psychological safety. And when I say that, I'm really talking about coziness and comfort, right? I'm not talking about psychological safety in terms of social justice or physical safety in terms of the pandemic. I just mean that it felt very safe and contained and cozy, and it felt like a safe place to experiment with ideas, to experiment with maybe taking some risks professionally and personally that I maybe, and creatively, that I maybe wouldn't have taken otherwise. Moving into this house, it's got some higher ceilings. The windows are bigger. The light in the Southwest is drastically different than it was in Elgin, Texas. And so there is, oh man, it is. My husband and I were talking about this, how this space, this physical space, allows for, it just feels differently calm and quiet. And there's my word, not his, but there's kind of almost a spiritual or reverent feeling to it. I feel so at ease here. And that is necessarily affecting how I am able to show up to the work I do. I'm getting ready to sort of like embark on what have traditionally been some uncomfortable processes for me. And I feel very grounded. I feel very connected, like earth and fire are very present for me right now. So there's kind of like an alchemy. And the word awestruck, I'm very awestruck by my environment right now. The skies are big, the storms are beautiful and violent and colorful. The mountains are 20 minutes away, and I'm able to go be in that space. whenever I want. And so how is it affecting like how, like philosophically, how I exist? The space is more open, and I feel like it is helping me sort of like open into this next phase. So it's kind of it's a beautiful reflection, and I think I just love how it feels like it's going to nurture and make some things possible that didn't maybe feel as possible in the house that I came from. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I'm just curious what you would say. And that's cool.
I think the physical spaces that we exist in are so, I mean, I've thought this since architecture days, but like as an expression of our values and our humanity and what we love and care about, I mean, it is the work that you are doing with connecting people that are building homes, buying homes, the land, their values, these different, I mean, it is so important and rich, that work, because to be in a physical place that expresses something about your values and how you want to live, oh my gosh, it is a kind of freedom and alignment and a kind of exhale, like a,
oh, I literally just took a big exhale.
Yeah, right? It's like, finally, now what? Right? Not a what, but like a
I love that. Now what?
Right?
Oh my gosh.
That's where the possibility is, right? It's like
what I feel like, yeah, that's what the striving is all about. It's to get to the point where you're finally like, oh, okay. Now that I have my needs, I get it is kind of it is a need. Shelter is a human need. I learned this in survival school. Shelter pose. Turns out this doesn't keep you warm at night. But yeah, oh wow, I love that. Why do you think so many people don't feel at home on Earth?
Well, this is going to be a very broad brush answer, but I think disconnection from self breeds disconnection from others. I think even when we are connected to ourselves, not having the capacity or the skills to connect with others who maybe aren't connected to themselves. So, for me, connection's at the heart of it. Yeah. Like I said, and connection is going to heal the world, but
what gives you faith in humanity and hope in a better future?
Oh man. Two things come to mind. One is the creative capacity that we all possess. You asked earlier, can everybody be creative? Creativity is a capacity, and it's innate in us. It's how we have survived for millennia. And I think creativity, connecting to our innate capacity and cultivating that, makes it possible for us to imagine a different world. And if we can't imagine different possibilities and then have the courage to take creative action in that direction, then we're not going to go anywhere. The second piece of that comes to mind is, honestly, I think that the younger generations that are coming up right now, I think they are going to be uniquely suited for the work ahead. I think that as the world continues to awaken to the value of the emotional life, the necessity of embodiment, body, emotion, languages, creativity, as we begin to accept, incorporate, and embrace these aspects of ourselves, we begin to give that to the younger generations earlier and earlier. And I can't wait to see, I have 3 nephews. The youngest is sophomore in high school next year, maybe this year. Sorry about that, Henry. And maybe he's a freshman. He's a freshman. Anyway.
Oh, Henry.
Oh, Henry. But, I look at my nephews and their friends and there is a kind of emotional intelligence that I think they are exposed to and have access to that I definitely did not when I was a kid. And again, this is a broad brush statement, but it gives me hope to think about what's possible because of where they are starting from. And what happens when they begin to step more fully into the world and participating in, making choices and shaping the world. And that has me very, very excited. Yeah. And
hello.
The shakeup of the pandemic, right? I don't mean to be reductive when I say the shakeup, because this was a devastating and traumatic time, and it continues to unfold.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that this collective trauma, as uncomfortable and disconnected as it might feel right now, I think that the collective experience, having been through a collective experience on a community level, city, state, nation, like it ripples out, right? It creates a different opportunity for us to come together and have different kinds of conversations. And as long as we have people that are willing to lead different kinds of conversations, we're inviting that space of connection in different ways. And we're teaching ourselves and each other how to come together. And that gives me hope for humanity in the future as well.
Oh, that's beautiful. It really, I'm so glad, because I just interviewed Perry Noppert. I mentioned the multi-potentialite nonlinear specialist, nonlinear thinking specialist that I interviewed. I might release these in opposite order. So, but it made me think of some of the things he has inspired in me, which is that I think the future is just filled with multi-potentialite generalist specialist type thinkers, because the emotional intelligence I've seen in very young children working with kids now in education and like mentoring, like I had no idea I could have such emotionally intelligent conversations with 6-year-olds. Like they can like state their needs, not 6 always, but like a 9-year-old articulating their needs to me in a way that I can actually like help them regulate. It's like, wow, I didn't know. It's so cool. And to your imagining point too, like I asked him the same question, like, what is the role of that? And his answer was, you need it. When you need something, you need to imagine. I mean, I still am reeling with just imagination as a thing. Like I still am trying to grapple with it, because it seems to be the thing that propels us forward in a healing way. Like we're talking about like this the connection and like, hey, allowing us to change in the way of being is because we can imagine something better than we've been. And like that's so, and then the way that it affects young people and like their intrinsic knowing of themselves seems to be because we can imagine a generation that does that. And with every, the things that we can, I don't know where I'm going with it, but very, very cool. Thank you. Yeah. See, I was like rapid fire. And then I'm like, no, let's philosophize some more.
Oh no, I got full body yes with what you were just saying. So
yay. Cool. Yeah. I hope others did too. What do you, okay. last question, kind of. Do you think the world is a better place because of people like you?
I hope so. You know, I mean, I don't know. Do you have people that answer this question yes unequivocally?
I'm waiting for that. But I just want to, it's a weird question, but I just want to see.
Yeah.
Be,
So
well,
yeah, no, I appreciate the question because, you know, I guess I aspire to get to a place where I say yes with absolute conviction, without that feeling arrogant or, you know, like, or boastful, right? Like, I'm cool. No. Here's the thing that I do know. I do know that when you say people like me, what I think about is, or I define that, or I finish that thought out by thinking, well, yeah, I'm a person that's committed to service. I'm committed to serving others. I'm committed to creating something, helping others generate something in the world that I think is going to contribute to a kind of healing and coming together in a way that's going to leave the world a better place than when I found it. And I guess you asked me a question about philosophy earlier. I have one thing that I have been consistently committed to throughout my life, and thank theater for this one. But whenever you show up to a theater and you show up to do work and you're making work, whatever kind of work that is, you always leave it better than when you found it. You show up to a theater and the floor is dirty, then before you leave, you're going to pick up a broom and you're going to sweep the floor. Doesn't matter who you are, what your role is, how much power you have, how much money you make, or what your title is. Being committed to leaving the world better than when you found it. I do genuinely think that if we committed to something as simple as that, we would keep heading in the right direction, you know? So yeah, I hope that the world is a better place because of, uncomfortable to say, but yeah.
I think you've hit the core at why that's an important question for me, because I mean, if nothing else, as a question, it reminds us that we're here doing something. Like I mentioned, some of my philosophy around nutrition, one of them is you have to eat. Your body's already hungry. You're gonna feed it something. You're gonna live. We're all aging every day. What are, you know, commitment, you know, what are we committed to? Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it's a great question.
You mentioned, like, once you get your office set up, you're gonna have all these little like philosophy like things, and one that I have, my mom has one. I'm actually in, she has her computer now in my old room here, and a little note that I pulled off. I think she got this from my office because I used to have this taped up in my office, but it says, "Every blessing ignored becomes a curse."
Ooh.
And I was like, oh, I'm glad you kept that one, Mom. Which I love that, and I love that because it reminds me that, oh, this is a blessing. It reminds me to see all of them, and I'm your stories and my stories and the way you've like told, like that our stories even weave together is such a blessing for me. And there's one story in particular that I asked you about that then we discovered we each hold all these stories about the story. And so the story that I want to end on is when we were in Austin together. After maybe the final day of the workshop, I don't know, but we were in the river.
It now.
The tree
I think
or
so.
the river? We were okay. So all of us, Rafe Kelly was there. That's when we first met Rafe, who I now live close to around the Seattle area and do parkour with. Part of and so we were swinging out of trees and climbing trees with him, and I jumped off a bridge. I've never been the same since I jumped off that bridge in Austin. And we were in the river and we were like, let's go do that. And you were scared of it or something.
Yeah.
And you said, oh, that's not my
That's
tree.
not my
And I was
tree.
like, "What do you mean?" And you had this story about how when you were a kid, you fell out of a tree, and that was what was holding you back from that moment. And hearing you say, wait, that's not my tree. I mean, embodied yoga principles was all about life linking. And so I was in this space of like, wow, you're linking your current fear now to what's holding you back in this moment is only holding you back because of an old fear with an old tree. And I was so inspired by you standing in the river, looking at this tree going, but that's not my tree. This is a new tree, a new opportunity, a new Sarah is here. And I'm just, what's your connection to that story? And what are you remembering right now? And how has that changed for you?
No, I'm so glad you gave the context of the river and Rafe Kelly. And I have this image immediately of you running your ass up that tree, parkour style. And I was like, no, I'm not doing, are you crazy, you people? And, you know, Rafe is just watching him move through space is like watching the face of God appear. I mean, it's like,
oh my God,
he does, right?
I hope he never hears that.
He would hate that, right? But I'm thinking like in the Elizabeth Gilbert tradition of ole, 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 Allah, Allah, Allah. That's amazing. Bravo, right? Okay. But like watching him move through space it like defies gravity. The laws of physics don't exist. It's kind of amazing. And I remember, so we were at Casa de Luz, for anybody from Austin that's listening, we're at Casa de Luz where the training was, and it's so great. And we went over to Barton Creek afterwards. And there's that bridge over it. And I remember, I can't remember I don't think I jumped off the bridge. I think everybody else did.
Just me and Rafe did.
Was it just you and Rafe? Okay.
Yeah,
listen to how I synthesize that.
Yeah, that's one reason I wanted to go study.
Had the courage to jump, but me. Everybody did it. Yeah.
Oh, no.
Okay, so yeah, I remember then I crossed the bridge, I get down in the water, and we're all kind of hanging out there. And there was a tree that was kind of leaning over, and I remember like Rafe had kind of coached you, and you were a little bit nervous to go up in the tree, or you didn't trust that you could do it, and then you did it, and you were like so excited and awesome. And I remember thinking like, am I going to do that? I'm not going to try that. I'm not going to do that. And that's when you were asking me like, what is it about the tree or whatever? And it brought up that story. So when I must have been 9 years old, we're hiking in Colorado, and I had climbed up, there was a tree that had fallen over, and it was crossing the path, but it was leaning above the path. So here's the ground, and the tree was leaning like this. The bark had been completely smoothed off. And I was a gymnast, so I'm like climbing all over it, and I scoot myself up, and I'm sitting there and I'm posing for a picture, like the one time in my life where I'm like, hey, can you take a picture of me? And I lose my friction on the tree, and I flip upside down, and I'm hanging on to it. It's totally slick without any bark. Hanging onto it, and my fingers, and I fall flat on my back, and it knocks the wind out of me. Ugh. And I am scared. I have no idea what's happening. And of course, the adults around me are freaking out, or my perception is that the adults are freaking out. I don't know if they were probably just fine and kind of giggling and, like, aw. And so I'm crying, and I'm trying to catch my breath. And I was embarrassed. Because, I'm a gymnast, and I about all this stuff. I mean, it had all the things in it. So, as a 30 whatever year old, I'm sitting here in Barton Creek looking at that tree going, nope, not going to do that. Like, that's not my tree. That's not the tree that I had as a child. And also, it's okay. I'm not going to do that today. That's not my tree. Sort of like how that landed with me. Or that's what I'm remembering of it right now. Yeah. God.
And I don't even remember if you did end up going up in that tree in Barton
I don't
Creek.
think I did.
But I have just always remembered that, because it was like we had practiced life linking, and then that linked to my life, obviously, in a very impactful way.
Yeah. It's amazing when it happens in real time, right? Where it's just like, it's so organic, like you're so open to asking those kinds of questions that the associations just begin to happen. It's one of my favorite moments in coaching, right? When you're in a coaching conversation and somebody's like, this is such a weird association. And I'm like, nope, probably not. Let's hear it. Like, it's probably going to be amazing. Let's see why, because it teaches us. It's amazing.
Do you want to share, like, when I brought that up again to you over time, like your new association?
Yeah. So when you brought it up earlier, and I couldn't remember the story about Barton Creek, it's not my tree. I was very aware. It's so funny that I have two moments of this in my life, right? It's not my tree. It's interesting. I have to like noodle on that as a metaphor. But in the 3 years before my mom passed away, without intending to, my mom and I started to become great creative collaborators. And for a long time, I struggled. I felt like I was definitely my dad's daughter. I didn't understand like how my mom was in me, which is silly because she's highly creative. She always was. She made our clothes, and she's funny and played piano and all this stuff. But the 3 years before she got real sick, suddenly she was calling to ask me things like, so I bought a chandelier at an antique store and it's bright brass and I want to paint it to look like, nickel or whatever. What kind of paint should I buy? My mom had never done a paint project in her life. And, it was very juicy to me to have my mom call me and, kind of validating, like, my daughter knows how to mix paint and paint stuff. I'm going to ask her how to do this. So I'm like coaching her over the phone about how to color mix and what kind of paint she should buy and all this. And then, the opposite of that, when I would go to visit them, they lived in Pennsylvania at the time. She'd be like, what do you want to do today? And I say, I have my camera. Let's go trespass. Let's go find some rock ruins of old, 18th century gatehouses, and I want to take some pictures. I like ruins. And so we drive around and like go take pictures. And I had no idea what I'm using these pictures for, but she was game. And there were just these bits of creative juice that would come in. We'd drive home. She pulled over to the side of the road and she'd look at those deer in the field. And the light would be like a painting at 5 p.m. and there's deer in the field. And she'd be like, isn't that just amazing? I'd be like, do it like my mom. Whoa, what is happening? So I had this great experience of her. And one of the things that we started to do consistently pretty early on was I went there one time and she said, I have this tree that I have to show you. I got to show you this tree. And so we drove to this tree, and it's a giant, I think it's a sycamore. It has this white, smooth bark, and it kind of like paper in some places. So it was peeling off and it would reveal color underneath it. And it was so big and huge that the smooth trunk, it looked like bone. And it had, it's the way that it was shaped and swaying in the breeze. It sort of had this aliveness to it. And I was seeing human shapes in it. It was just so beautiful. It was nestled in between like a couple of roads and a river coming by, and there's this beautiful old mill house next to it. And so we would go visit this, and I would just photograph it, just take pictures every season, spring, summer, winter, fall, for years. And at some point while my mom was sick, I remember her, we had stopped. We were at the point where we didn't need to work through anything. We'd said a lot of the things that needed to be said. We'd forgiven things. We weren't talking about a future that we both kind of knew wasn't going to happen. We were just very present. And one of the things that she said was, "Do you still have pictures of that tree?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." And she's like, "I always loved taking you to your tree." And I thought, my tree? That's not my tree, that's your tree. And it was just such a beautiful moment of recognizing, I don't know, it felt very precious to have this moment where the thing that I felt so connected to my mom by, she felt so connected to me by. So it's just a beautiful moment of being seen and seeing. Yeah.
Just like that time in Barton Creek.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that like other level of the not my tree, because it was like hearing you share that in regard to like one story and that brought in another story. It just has me very appreciative and in awe of the way that stories and people thread together, and our associations, like you're saying with coaching, like the associations that people make, how they form our habits and our embodiment and everything. And to choose to remember, stories that we want to remember. Beautiful. And you are a blessing I will not ignore. And I want, I guess I'm so grateful for you. I'm grateful to have this conversation in this room, to talk about mothers and fathers. I'm grateful that this is my mother's desk and that this is my dad's Civil War painting and my grandmother's sewing machine that my mom uses, and my dad's in a room that they helped me paint when I was like 10. They were like, "For Christmas you can paint your room whatever color you want," and I was like, "Blue." So I wanted to acknowledge all of the threads and associations of this even happening. And I'm so grateful for you, Sarah.
Oh, Sarah, I'm so grateful for you. Thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation, the invitation, the beautiful alchemy that came together for you birthing this project, the idea of the project a year and a half ago. I'm so excited about this work that you're doing, and I am so humbled and grateful to be a part of it, whatever part I get to play. So thank you for shepherding this work, being a steward, carrying it forward, and giving it a voice.
It's a voice.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, people like you, I think, really help build home for our humanity, and you've helped build mine. So until next time.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.